Let's talk about the validity of experiments and how that can differ across different types of experiments. Validity here is of two types, internal and external. Internal validity has to do with whether the results we observe in the experiment can be attributed solely to the stimulus, also known as the manipulation or the treatment. The idea is that if we fail to control for extraneous factors that can affect the dependent variable, we are unable to tell whether the results we observe are due to the stimulus or due to the extraneous factors. These extraneous factors are also called confounding variables. We try to increase internal validity by designing experiments and procedures that eliminate these confounding variables. Most of the time we can do this by ensuring that all the conditions of the experiment are the same across all the groups. That is, the location of the experiment, the characteristics of the subjects, the time of day for the experiment, the instructions given to subjects, etc. Everything except the stimulus should be the same for all the groups, because if anything differs across the groups, that can lower the internal validity and confound the results. External validity has to do with generalizability of the experimental results. That is, would the same results be obtained if the experiment was conducted in a real world, that is, a natural setting, or with other populations of subjects? If not, the experiment is said to have low validity. The degree of validity will often depend on the type of experiment we conduct. Experiments can be either field or laboratory experiments. Lab experiments are those that are conducted in a controlled environment, such as a research facility where the researcher has full control over what the subject hears, sees, or experiences. Naturally, such an experiment will typically have higher internal validity, and that is one reason it is preferred in many situations. It is also less expensive and less time-consuming to do lab studies, since the facilities are under the researcher's control. However, lab experiments suffer from the enormous disadvantage of taking the subject out of their natural environment. This has the potential to create all types of biases, as we will see shortly. Thus, researchers who conduct lab studies have to try and minimize the effects of these biases by recreating natural settings as much as possible. Field studies are those that are conducted in the field, meaning a natural setting, with the subjects being unaware that they are participating in a study. Obviously, the major advantage of this approach is that the subject's responses will be much more natural. Where field experiments have a limitation is, as you might expect, with internal validity. Since the environment is not under the researcher's control, confounding variables can affect the results. Field experiments can also be very time-consuming and expensive to run. For these reasons, researchers often prefer lab experiments, provided the external validity issue can be addressed. Here are some of the major threats to validity that can arise when running experiments. The following threats are more likely to be an issue in field experiments, though they can arise in lab studies too. Selection bias. This occurs when the groups are different at the start of the experiment. If these differences are correlated with a dependent variable, that can make it impossible to determine the true effect of the stimulus. For example, if you conduct an experiment to test the effect of a promotion for an iPhone on sales of the iPhone, and if one group is younger than the other, that group is more likely to buy an iPhone anyway, and you'll never be able to isolate the effects of the promotion from the effect of the subject's age. In a field experiment, you have less control over the composition of the test and control groups, so selection bias is more likely. Another threat is that due to history, a term that in this context means something quite different than the usual meaning. History refers to the effects of variables that are not within the researcher's control. For example, weather problems, power outages, stockouts, or competitive promotions can disrupt sales in the store, thereby confounding the results. Again, this is more likely in a field study because you lack control over these aspects of the environment. Maturation occurs when subjects change during the course of the experiment. This is a function of the time the experiment takes. In a field study lasting months or years, subjects will get older and may experience changes in employment or health, or get married or have a child, any one of which may have an impact on their responses. In a lab study, the change can be in the form of feeling hungry, thirsty, bored, tired, etc., which can also affect their responses. Mortality. While it can sometimes refer to subjects dying in the experiment, more commonly it refers to subjects dropping out of the study. This can be a problem if the subjects who drop out are systematically different from those who remain. For example, supposing you were testing the effect of a new TV ad that you thought might be offensive to some. After you show the ad, if some people who are offended decide to withdraw from the study, that would bias the overall results and make them more positive than they otherwise would be. The following threats are more likely to be an issue in lab experiments. Generalizability refers to external validity, that is, to the question, can the results be generalized to the target population or to other groups in the population? This is very often a concern with lab experiments, since subjects' responses in an artificial lab environment are quite likely to differ from those in a natural setting. Therefore, in a lab study, we have to try and make it as realistic as possible so that subjects believe it is a real setting and their responses are more natural. Reactive bias, also known as the Hawthorne effect, refers to the fact that subjects who know that they are being studied are likely to react artificially. Hawthorne, in this case, refers to the Hawthorne Works factory in Illinois owned by Western Electric, where this effect was first studied almost 100 years ago. See the links below the video for an article about it and for a documentary about the phenomenon. A final threat that may arise is known as demand characteristics. This refers to a subconscious bias caused by the subject's knowledge that they are being studied. Subjects invariably try to guess the objective of the study or its hypotheses, and they may change their behavior so as to confirm the hypothesis. For this reason, researchers often have elaborate cover stories to disguise the true nature of the experiment and to prevent the subject from guessing its objectives. See the experiments conducted by Solomon Asch, which were classic studies in social psychology that tested subjects' desire to conform to the group. To disguise the objective, Asch came up with a simple but highly effective cover story. See the link below the video for a short clip about one of these studies. Experimental research has evolved since the early days, especially in the way subjects are treated. As a result of some early experiments that put subjects at risk of physical or psychological harm, many regulations have been put in place to ensure that the safety of the subjects is given paramount importance. In addition, researchers are required to obtain subjects' consent to participate after being given full knowledge of any adverse effects that they might experience as a result of their participation. Here are some classic experiments that would not be permitted today because of how they put subjects at risk. You can find links to these documentaries below this video.